Winning a woman's heart isn't about romance. It's a silent battle of psychology, where every move you make determines your victory or defeat. If Machiavelli were alive now, he wouldn't advise rulers. He'd map the female mind like a strategist charts enemy territory. This hidden experiment reveals true seduction isn't charm. It's the quiet power of a man who sees what she conceals, even from herself. No one is certain Machiavelli truly authored this secret text. It was discovered centuries later, concealed in a wall behind a Florentine bookcase. Some think it was a private psychological study he hid from the world. Others claim its ideas were too potent for public eyes. But the document was real. Inside, Machiavelli dissected with brutal focus what he named the invisible mechanics of desire. He argued women don't choose through reason alone. They decide through a whirlwind of sensation, emotion, and gut feeling. And if a man masters the storm, he becomes impossible for her to overlook. Machiavelli didn't discuss love or flattery. He discussed control. How to enter a woman's thoughts unnoticed and make her feel every step toward you is her own idea. According to manuscript, it starts before you even meet her gaze. He wrote, "Attraction sparks from scarcity, not constant presence. A man who is always there loses worth because he expends his effort without restraint, strategy, or aim. He becomes transparent, and transparent men do not captivate." He stated, "A rare man is valued above a flawless one." This means your first tool isn't your smile or your words, but strategic space. He explained that distance breeds intrigue, and intrigue is a first fracture in someone's emotional guard. A woman doesn't fixate on what she already knows. She becomes drawn to what she can't yet decipher. That's why Machiavelli warned, the gravest error men commit is seeking to be comprehended too quickly. In his test, he instructed a group of men to remain one step behind the women they desired. Not remote, not aloof, just one step back. Near enough to be seen, but scarce enough to be missed. The outcome was startling. The women not only discussed these men more, they began closing the distance themselves, unaware they were being guided. It was the inception of the silent influence he aimed to demonstrate. Machiavelli noted that a woman pursues what she fears losing, not what she already possesses. The experiment confirmed it perfectly. Then he advanced to the second phase, crafting emotional contrast. Machiavelli believed a woman only forms a deep bond with a man when he makes her experience two conflicting feelings simultaneously: security and uncertainty. Not physical danger, but psychological risk. The anxiety of not measuring up, the dread of being overlooked, the sensation of facing someone she respects yet cannot fully predict. A man offering only safety becomes companion. A man offering only threat becomes a foe. But a man who blends both becomes an obsession. In the text, he details guiding dialogues to trigger slight doubts in women, while then offering instant reassurance. He'd make a remark, leaving her momentarily puzzled. Moments later, he'd give praise that pulled her back emotionally. It was harsh yet effective, and he knew it. The third stage involved mastering tempo. Machiavelli said, "A woman becomes enamored with the pause, not the gesture. It isn't the message that builds allure, but the silence preceding it. It isn't the praise that lingers, but the deliberate wait before offering it." The women in the study reported, without understanding why, that they felt a sense of absence, even when the man had promised nothing. That feeling of missing something was the emotional doorway required for the next step: selective reflection. Selective reflection meant demonstrating shared traits only when the woman was emotionally open. It wasn't about constant agreement or mimicking her moves. It was about mirroring solely what deepened the link. When she revealed vulnerability, he showed comprehension. When she displayed confidence, he offered a slight challenge. When she spoke of aspirations, he hinted at grander goals. And when she voiced fear, he demonstrated bravery. This forged an illusion of perfect alignment, that addictive sense that he is exactly what I lack. The final part of this opening section discussed a detail that was simple yet devastating. For Machiavelli, a gaze wasn't a window to the soul. It was a tactical weapon. He trained himself to maintain eye contact only until the woman began to feel the need to glance away. And once she broke the look, It was already over, because the mind registers at first glance away as unconscious yielding. Machiavelli wrote coldly, "The woman who looks away first will later strive to reclaim dominance." And it's in that struggle that emotional investment starts. This was merely the experiment's opening. The rest of the manuscript delved into even more shadowy tactics, where allure and control blended so seamlessly that many still argue it should have remained buried. The text showed that after mastering intrigue, emotional swings, and the power of look, the experiment approached its most perilous phase, psychological integration. Machiavelli defined this as the skill to weave yourself into a woman's thinking so seamlessly she believed she imagined you first. He said, "A woman only truly surrenders when she feels the concept of you originated within her, never when she senses she was steered toward it. Just as a cunning leader doesn't impose his rule, but makes people desire his guidance, the Machiavellian suitor doesn't demand admiration, he cedes it. To achieve this, he taught three subtle instruments: the uncommon action, the planted phrase, and phantom presence. The uncommon action was a minor, unforeseen behavior that left profound emotional imprint. It couldn't be grand or expected, but a nuance that triggered in her mind a sensation of being singular. In the test, the trained men did simple things like moving a loose strand of her hair, while saying something utterly unpredictable, and then never doing it again. The effect was powerful. Unconsciously, the women began anticipating a repetition that never arrived. In its absence, the memory of the gesture expanded within them. Machiavelli wrote, "The uncommon action creates recollection. Recollection creates yearning, and yearning creates want." The second instrument was the planted phrase. He believed specific words, delivered with perfect timing, take root in a woman's mind like inner thoughts. They weren't clear compliments or poetic lines. They were observations that nudged her self-perception in an intriguing way. Something like, "You have little clue how often people misread you." Or, "It's interesting. You project strength, yet you hold burdens nobody sees." Hearing this, she'd strive to prove to herself that he perceived her uniquely. In the experiment logs, many women confessed they pondered those phrases for hours, even days, seeking their full meaning. That was the objective. The planted phrase wasn't meant for instant comprehension. It was designed to grow quietly on its own. The third method, which Machiavelli viewed as the most sophisticated, was phantom presence. Here, the man learned to leave mental traces that persisted in his absence, not through messages or constant attention, but through a psychological footprint. He taught that the key was to alternate brief withdrawals with small emotional gifts, creating a cycle where the woman would naturally wonder where he was, what occupied him, or why he hadn't yet appeared. The secret was to appear engaged with a purpose larger than her, without ever seeming disinterested. In the trials, when a man vanished for some hours after a deep talk, the woman reacted with a blend of nervousness and anticipation. It was in this emotional void that true captivation intensified. Machiavelli wrote something unsettling about this stage. A woman only obsesses over a man when she realizes she cannot fully predict him. For him, the male error was surrendering predictability too soon. He observed that when a woman felt she could forecast all a man's responses, she swiftly categorized him as neutral, someone who stirs no feeling. But when she couldn't predict him, she started constructing theories, stories, and possibilities in her own head. And the more she imagined, the more emotionally tethered she became to his idea. "A woman's imagination is my greatest asset," he wrote. "That is where the game is truly won." The manuscript then detailed the fourth act, constructing the irresistible persona. Machiavelli claimed that to deeply captivate a woman, charm, presence, or mystery weren't enough. One had to craft an emotional character that matched her hidden fractures. He said, "Every heart contains a flaw. The victor is the one who finds that flaw and molds himself to fit it." Therefore, during the experiment, he ordered each man to watch not what the woman said, but what she left unsaid. Silence always betrayed more than speech. And when a woman, even unintentionally, revealed a fragment, a fleeting expression, a half-told memory, a distant gaze, or a sad breath, that's where the strategic suitor built his identity. The irresistible persona wasn't a false front. It was an authentic version of the man, but finely tuned. He kept his core, but emphasized traits the woman secretly valued and minimized aspects that could shatter the spell too early. It was like refining his own image until it mirrored her emotional contours. This included his speech patterns, his vocal tone, his humor, his posture, even his responses to challenge. In diaries kept by the women involved, many said it felt as if he grasped them effortlessly. They never guessed his understanding was planned, shaped, and polished to meet their unspoken hopes. At this section's end, Machiavelli wrote a line that captured the entire logic of strategic allure. A woman doesn't fall for man. She falls for the version of herself that stirs to life when she is near him. This principle guided the rest of the text, which would plunge into even darker realms of psychology and methods he deemed too strong for ordinary men. The third segment entered one of the experiment's bleakest areas, emotional control through oscillation. Machiavelli believed no woman gives herself to a man who offers only comfort. He stated, "The female heart requires peaks and valleys, instances of fervor followed by calm, so that genuine desire can flourish. Allure is not born from steadiness. It is born from fluctuation." And it was this precise fluctuation he tested almost mathematically. For this, he devised a system he named the irregular pulse of attention. It wasn't about vanishing entirely or being ever-present. It was a calculated dance between availability and unavailability, intensity and planned attachment. Machiavelli noted that a woman must sense a man possesses his own world, a realm she wishes to enter, but one he permits her to access only partly. When a man becomes completely available, he loses emotional gravity. When he becomes entirely distant, he loses significance. True captivation lies in the middle, where the woman feels she must exert some effort to reach his finest layer. In the experiment, the men were told to generate minor moments of dissatisfaction, not arguments or disrespect, but small discomforts that made the woman aware she lacked full command. This included delaying replies slightly, ending a chat when her interest peaked, or shifting topics when she expected affirmation. The aim wasn't to annoy her, but to activate what Machiavelli termed the instinct for emotional conquest. Women, according to him, engage more with what they haven't yet secured and less with what's already assured. But his darker genius emerged in the next step. He rewarded this frustration with measured doses of profound focus. When the woman began to feel slight unease, the man offered a gesture, a phrase, or a presence that made her feel special again. This cycle of strain and reward built a silent emotional reliance. In the women's reports, many said they felt something distinct with these men, a mix of nervous excitement and solace. That was exactly Machiavelli's goal, the sensation of emotional addiction. He wrote, "A woman mistakes strong feeling for profound connection." For him, if a man could generate powerful enough emotions, even conflicting ones, he would forge a psychological anchor nearly unbreakable. The human mind, he argued, attaches to what makes a heart sway, not to what keeps it still. That's why warm, feeble bonds fade, while intricate ones become indelible. Machiavelli understood that by directing the emotional climate, the man directs the pace of attachment. Next, the manuscript described one of the test's most contentious methods, the illusion of being unique. Here, Machiavelli said, the woman must believe there is something in her the man cannot find elsewhere. Its truth is irrelevant. What matters is she feels irreplaceable, but only to a degree. He instructed the men to admire specific qualities of the woman, but always hinting these qualities could fade. For instance, a man might say, "I admire how you perceive things in a manner almost no one else does, though sometimes you mask that insight." Thus, the praise arrived with a subtle shadow, and that shadow activated her drive to prove her singular value to him. Machiavelli also tested the tactic of strategic friction. This was a gentle disagreement where the man questioned something about the woman not to diminish her, but to create emotional texture. He believed when a woman senses a man can perceive facets of her others ignore, she starts linking him to her own sense of self. It wasn't a fight. It was controlled stimulation. A statement like, "You appear resilient, but your eyes tell a different story," held the power to open emotional space for more personal, vulnerable dialogue. The experiment showed that when men used this type of soft friction, women drew closer emotionally, trying to explain themselves, to confide, to justify. They wanted to be comprehended. And when they felt the man alone could comprehend them, a bond of dependency formed. Machiavelli wrote, "A woman offers her heart to the one who grasps her contradictions, not because he does, but because she believes he does." The distinction was subtle, but the manipulation was deep. The text then moved to induced emptiness. This was Machiavelli's preferred and most dangerous technique. He directed that after a moment of high emotional intensity, the man should withdraw gently, almost imperceptibly. It wasn't about disappearing, but about lowering the voltage. The woman, accustomed to the depth of that moment, immediately sensed the emotional drop and tried to fill it. In the reports he gathered, many women admitted they thought about the men precisely when the men stepped back slightly. He concluded, "No one longs for someone who is always present. We only long for those who give us something precious and then recede briefly." This tactic deepened the mystery, amplified the man's emotional worth, and, crucially, placed a woman in a state of constant waiting. And when a woman lives in anticipation, everything the man does, even the smallest act, feels more significant, more loaded, more memorable. Ending this part, Machiavelli stated all of this wasn't a lure, but emotional training. He said, "A trained heart mistakes dependency for love." And up to that juncture, the experiment progressed exactly toward that end. The fourth section revealed what Machiavelli named the point of no return. It was a stage where the woman began to feel emotionally tied to the man without fully grasping how it occurred. Machiavelli described this moment as subtle, nearly invisible, but unmistakable to the trained observer. "It appears," he wrote, "when the woman thinks of the man last at night and first upon waking. It isn't love. It's psychological infiltration." To reach this state, he introduced a method of calculated disclosure. He said for a man to occupy a woman's thoughts, he needed to reveal something that seemed personal but in reality served only to unlock her emotions. The disclosure couldn't be too profound or too trivial. It had to feel genuine enough for her to believe she was receiving a piece of him no one else saw. In the test, the men shared small, strategic vulnerabilities, an old anxiety, a difficult childhood recollection, or an unfulfilled aim. Nothing that truly risked their ego, but sufficient to trigger the female instinct to nurture. And when the woman activated this instinct, when she felt she had access to a concealed part of him, something shifted inside. She began to feel distinctive, selected, necessary. Machiavelli called this emotional capture through empathy. According to him, no force is stronger for a woman than believing her care has the power to mend something within a man, even if that something was fabricated or carefully amplified for this purpose. In the women's reports, many said nearly identical things. He seemed so strong outwardly, yet so human inwardly. I wanted to stay near to understand him better. That was precisely what Machiavelli hoped to hear. The sense of duality that transformed simple interest into psychological fixation. From that point, the woman was no longer merely interested. She was invested. The calculated disclosure, however, didn't operate alone. Machiavelli paired it with another vital element, selective guardianship. Here, the man demonstrated a very particular type of care that made the woman believe he saw her profoundly and was attuned to her soft spots. He didn't declare, "I will protect you," but made minor gestures that implied it wordlessly. A glance that noticed her discomfort before she spoke. A simple sentence that dissolved the insecurity. A light intervention during an awkward pause. The care felt intuitive, almost naturally intimate, and that was precisely why it was so potent. Machiavelli wrote, "Selective guardianship makes a woman crave reciprocity. She feels she must give something in return. And giving back, in this case, meant offering more emotional openness, more trust, more psychological surrender." Contrary to common belief, it wasn't the man who gave himself first to win the woman. It was a woman who, feeling guarded, began to reveal deeper emotions, hoping to solidify that link. And the more she revealed, the more exposed she became. Machiavelli observed that when a woman opens herself excessively, she creates an involuntary need for the man to remain close, not because he asked, but because she had already surrendered a part of herself. The next method described was even darker. Inverted reflection. Until then, the man mirrored traits that strengthened the bond. But at this stage, he was taught to reflect some of her pains and doubts, not to harm her, but to make her feel understood in a nearly hypnotic manner. Inverted reflection involved recognizing with grace and precision vulnerabilities she herself didn't admit. It didn't need to be major. It was enough for the man to notice small hesitations, concealed fears, prolonged silences, smiles at masked strain. Then he'd suggest this with carefully crafted phrases. You constantly strive to appear tough, yet I know certain things weary you far more than you acknowledge. Or, you look after everyone, but nobody truly looks after you, correct? For many women, this level of emotional insight is irresistible. In the dialogues Machiavelli analyzed, several women confessed they'd never felt so truly seen. He concluded, a woman gives herself to the man who sees portions of her that even she avoids. This created a perilous link, almost spiritual, that tied the woman to the man before she could notice. It wasn't passion. It was emotional reliance disguised as closeness. After this process, Machiavelli introduced the most critical technique, programmed silence. When the man sensed the woman was emotionally engaged, he gradually reduced the flow of attention, not as penalty but as tactic. For Machiavelli, silence was the ultimate emotional catalyst. He said when a woman encounters a sudden void after profound experiences, she begins to fill that void with interpretations, daydreams, and expectations. It is in silence, he wrote, that she constructs the idealized version of the man. Therefore, the man needed to do nothing. It was enough for him not to appear for a period for her, to start wondering what he was thinking, if something had shifted, or she had erred. This questioning generated insecurity, but a soft, managed insecurity. And this was the emotion Machiavelli deemed most effective. He noted that when a woman tries to restore her emotional equilibrium, she automatically desires to re-establish contact. And when contact finally occurred, she reacted with greater surrender, more intensity, and deeper attachment. The man thus became a sort of emotional sanctuary, even though he himself was the one who made her need that sanctuary. Concluding this part, Machiavelli summarized that allure isn't about making a woman like you, but about making her feel she needs you maintain the emotional balance you yourself disrupted. A ruthless logic, yet incredibly potent, and the foundation of the experiment's latter half. The fifth section began with a line many historians view as among the coldest Machiavelli ever penned. When a woman believes she chose a man, the game is over. When she believes she is being pursued, the game continues. This was the core of the next phase, directed self-deception. Machiavelli discovered the deepest captivation is born when the woman independently creates the narrative explaining why that man is different. The suitor's role wasn't to convince her of anything, but merely to supply fragments, like scattered pieces of an emotional puzzle. The woman herself completed the picture, and by completing it, became too emotionally committed to retreat. The first method of this phase was the interpretative frame. Here, the man never defined himself fully. He spoke little about himself but let small, ambiguous clues slip. A rare talent, an ancient loss, a mysterious goal, a seemingly contradictory trait. As the woman tried to make sense of these disconnected clues, she crafted an image far richer and more idealized than the man could ever construct alone. Machiavelli wrote, "The female mind completes what the man's silence implies." In the accounts of the studied women, this was evident. He seemed to contain an entire universe within. Or, I wanted to know everything, but he never told everything. That gap, that empty space between what he showed and what he withheld, was exactly what fed the fascination. The second method was engineered synchronicity. He guided the men to create moments that seemed accidental, but were meticulously planned for emotional effect. A classic example from the test. A man would casually mention a favorite song, and weeks later, by chance, that song would play where both were present. Another would discuss a childhood memory near water, and days later invite the woman to a waterfront spot without explanation. The sensation of symbolic connection was so potent the women reported it felt fated. Machiavelli wrote, "There is no fate. There is emotional design." The third method was the indirect path. He understood a woman doesn't fall for a man's presence, but for the feeling he comprehends her. So, the men were told to discuss feelings, principles, and perspectives, not directly about the relationship, but in ways the woman could interpret as aligning with her own desires. For instance, instead of stating, "I want a woman like this," the man would talk about what he valued in resolute, perceptive, or loyal individuals. As the woman listened, she identified automatically, and by feeling she matched his ideals, she began to experience what Machiavelli termed an amplified echo of her own self-worth. The fourth method, and perhaps the most Machiavellian of this phase, was the emotional pivot. He said the woman needs to feel the man can shift her emotions in small, nearly imperceptible degrees. It wasn't about sparking jealousy or drama. It was, for example, showing slight disappointment when she acted impulsively, followed by a smile that said, "I understand you." These minor emotional adjustments made her modify her behavior almost unconsciously to please him. It was a form of emotional conditioning, not explicit, not verbal, but profoundly effective. In the experiment records, he noted that when the man used these slight emotional variations, the woman began trying to rebuild her own image in his eyes, not because he demanded it, but because she wished to keep the connection alive. This is what he called effective self-adjustment. The woman alters her own conduct believing it's her choice, when in reality the subtle influence was carefully implanted. After this came the method of guided uncertainty. Doubt, according to Machiavelli, is the most powerful element of human desire. Not doubt about the man's character, but doubt about her own impact on his life. Something as simple as a shift in tone, an unexpected pause, an unfinished thought. The women reported, sometimes it felt like he was about to say something crucial, but stopped. Or, it felt like there was something unresolved between us. This created a field of gentle emotional tension, where the woman believed there was something in the air needing resolution. And nothing grips a heart more tightly than something that feels imminent but never fully arrives. Analyzing all this, he concluded that allure isn't a straight line, but an emotional spiral. Each turn draws a woman closer to the center, without her realizing she's moving. She believes she's discovering the man when in reality she's being carefully led to interpret each of his actions as meaningful. The final part of this stage described late emotional seeding, a moment when a man, after long cycles of tension and openness, lets slip a sentence that seems profound. Something like, "Sometimes I think you perceive aspects of me no one else does." Or, "It's been years since I connected with someone this way." The woman receives this as an emotional revelation, but Machiavelli knew it was merely fuel to prolong the cycle of idealization. He wrote, "A woman doesn't desire the man. She desires the story she can live with him." Up to this point, the experiment proved exactly that. Each technique shaped the emotional story she herself would begin to defend before any real relationship existed. And so, with self-deception in place, he moved to the darkest portion of all: how to transform this story into unbreakable attachment. The sixth part began with a shift in tone. Until then, he had described mechanisms of emotional influence that, while intense, still relied on subtlety. But from here, he explored what he called structural captivation, a stage where the woman not only feels but rearranges her emotional life around a man unknowingly. He opened with a disturbing sentence. "A woman doesn't bind herself to the man who wants her. She binds herself to the man who alters the internal axis of her choices." In other words, while common allure makes a woman like a man, Machiavellian allure makes her act differently because of him. The first method of this phase was a fixed emotional anchor. He found that for a woman to keep a man constantly in her mind, it was necessary to create a specific stimulus that triggered automatic recollection. It wasn't a physical gift or a rehearsed line. It was something emotional. In the test, the men crafted moments of deep intensity. A riveting conversation, a weighted silence, a gaze that seemed to pierce her defenses, then abruptly ended. This created an anchor. Whenever she later felt a similar emotion in daily life, her mind linked it to the man who first triggered it. Machiavelli explained, "Whoever awakens a new emotion owns the memory containing it." And for him, memory equaled power. The second method, called alternating immersion, involved placing the woman in contrasting emotional states in a controlled, not chaotic manner. In one meeting, the man was profound, attentive, observant. In another, he maintained some distance, some focus elsewhere, not coldness, but priority. He believed that by alternating these modes, the man created in the woman the feeling she needed to exert effort to access his more intimate side. This activated the instinct for conquest, but emotionally, not rationally. The women's reports were identical. I wanted to know which version of him was real. It felt like I was always discovering him and simultaneously trying to reach him. This perpetual search was the exact desired effect. The third method, described with near mathematical precision, was the inversion of emotional focus. Instead of seeking the woman's approval, as most men do, the strategic suitor made the woman seek his approval through subtle micro-judgments, small observations that weren't criticisms but generated self-awareness. For example, it's curious how you sometimes sidestep certain feelings, or you're strong but also quite proud. These phrases didn't attack. They revealed. They made the woman feel she needed to show the man a more authentic self. And in trying to show authenticity, she exposed herself emotionally. The more exposed she became, the more invested she was. He wrote, "A woman strives to please only when she feels she is being observed in her depth." And this striving was what he considered the true start of attachment. The fourth method was dependency through contrast. He knew a woman doesn't attach to what is constant, but to what varies. So the man would sometimes offer emotional solace, and sometimes challenge her. Sometimes he was tender, sometimes stern, sometimes intimate, sometimes reserved, always balanced, never extreme. This emotional fluctuation didn't create confusion, but depth. The woman never knew exactly which version she'd encounter, and that unpredictability became thrilling, addictive. The man became both a mystery and a safe harbor, complex enough to fascinate, stable enough not to repel. In the records, many women said, "He was unpredictable in a good way. I wanted to understand him completely." And for him, wanting to understand someone already meant being emotionally captured. The fifth method of this phase was the most strategic. The illusion of shared evolution. Here, the man made the woman feel she was growing alongside him, not by stating it directly, but by quietly guiding her toward deeper reflections. He asked questions like, "What do you truly want from life? Why do you undermine yourself in these moments? Don't you see how much you're changing?" These questions made the woman look inward, and she associated that process with the man. He wrote, "Whoever becomes a mirror of her evolution becomes essential." And being essential was the exact emotional status needed to dominate the final act. Before ending this part, he described the precise moment the woman was irreversibly entangled, when she began internally justifying all the man's flaws, absences, and imperfections. When she started explaining to herself why he was different, saying things like, "He's this way because he's endured pain," or "He has a unique manner," or "He just needs time." At this stage, he said the bond was solid. The woman wasn't defending the man. She was defending the story she created with him, even if it was just beginning. And it was here the experiment neared the deepest and most troubling territory of the entire work. The seventh section began with a marginal note by Machiavelli. Here we no longer study the woman. Here we study the human heart, facing what it craves but cannot command. It was a transition from strategic allure to profound attachment, the kind of emotional involvement that makes a woman reorganize behaviors, priorities, even beliefs. He said there were three levels: superficial, emotional, and existential. The experiment had reached the third. The first method of this phase was orbital presence. He explained that at this stage, the man no longer needed physical presence or effort to create mystery. The woman had already built an entire inner universe revolving around him. The goal now was to solidify this internal motion. The strategic suitor appeared at tactical moments, when she was vulnerable, extremely joyful, or pondering something deep. He never seemed to appear by accident, yet always seemed coincidental. It was as if he was present exactly where she emotionally needed him, even unknowingly. This pattern of coincidence forged a sensation of a spiritual link. He wrote, "When a woman believes you appear at the right instance, she begins to believe you belong to her destiny." And for him, destiny was merely manipulation with perfect timing. The second method was nurturing lack. He said the woman needed to feel fullness and absence simultaneously. Not a painful absence, but one that calls to her. This soft lack emerged when the man, after a moment of deep emotional intimacy, left something unspoken, unresolved, incomplete. The woman felt there was more to discover, more to grasp, as if the dialogue was always cut off at the most compelling point. This created what he termed the infinite curve, an emotional quest that never concludes, always promising, never fully delivering. In the analyzed reports, women said, "It always felt like there was something greater between us. I felt there was more of him to know." This feeling was the invisible emotional cage. The third method was directed exposure. Here, the man revealed specific weaknesses, not to elicit pity, but to forge partnership. He showed parts of his life that seemed too weighty to share with just anyone, but presented in a controlled way. They weren't destructive secrets, but human frailties that made the woman feel she alone could comprehend him. And when a woman feels she has access to the truest fragment of man, she creates an emotional duty to remain. He wrote, "A woman doesn't abandon what she believes, only she upholds." And at this stage, she was upholding an intimate version of the man, even if that version was carefully constructed to be upheld. The fourth method was the intermittence of warmth. The strategic suitor offered deep emotional closeness one day, and the next maintained a calm, light distance without explanation. It wasn't instability. It was rhythm. This alternation created a cycle where the woman felt she needed to regain his warmer side. And when she believed she needed to win him again, she automatically invested more. He saw this as the central mechanism of attachment, the woman's constant effort to access the best part of him. He explained it thus: when the best of you is scarce, she becomes a gardener of her own hope. And hope is among the strongest fuels of human desire. The fifth method was mirrored resonance. Here the man began subtly reflecting the woman's emotions, fears, and dreams, not to manipulate, but to make her believe he understood her at a level no one else did. It was a stage where he finished her sentences, anticipated her reactions, decoded her expressions. All this made the woman feel emotionally synchronized with him. And when two emotional rhythms feel synchronized, the brain interprets it as unavoidable intimacy. In the reports, women wrote, "It was like he understood me before I even spoke. It felt like I was linked to him by something unseen." That unseen link was, in reality, emotional engineering. After that, he reached the method of internal integration. Here, the man's presence no longer needed to be physical or verbal. He lived inside the woman. In simple daily choices, she considered how he'd react. In minor emotional moments, she imagined his words. In moments of doubt, she recalled his statements. He said that when her inner voice began to sound like his, the process was complete. The man started to exist within the woman, even when absent, and she began to act according to this internal presence. This was the deepest form of captivation, a captivation that no longer needed application. It sustained itself. In the final passages of this part, he explained the most dangerous phenomenon of all, progressive rationalization. The woman began to justify every action of the man that didn't make sense. If he withdrew, she called it his nature. If he appeared suddenly, she termed it spontaneity. If he stayed silent, she named it depth. If he erred, she said he was wounded. He wrote, "When a woman is profoundly involved, she doesn't love the man. She loves the interpretation she crafted to shield him within herself." And this emotional shielding became a wall, making the attachment nearly impossible to break. At this stage, the experiment had crossed every conceivable ethical line. Yet, he reserved the final part for the peak of manipulation, turning attachment into irrational loyalty. The last section was, according to scholars, the most dangerous of all. Here he abandoned any theoretical subtlety and described with almost surgical precision how to transform established emotional involvement into psychological loyalty, the experiment's final stage. He began with a line that still disquiets readers. The enamored woman seeks the man. The involved woman waits for the man. But the loyal woman constructs her world around the man. The experiment had reached this point, and what he described next was no longer allure, but emotional architecture. The first method of this final phase was called the sense of inevitability. After weeks of controlled emotional involvement, the man began creating in the woman the feeling that what existed between them wasn't the result of choices, but of something larger. He made remarks like, It's strange. Even when we're apart, it feels we always return to the same point. Or, I don't know why, but our talks always end intensely. These lines weren't compliments. They were narrative frameworks. They made the woman feel their connection wasn't coincidence, but emotional fate. And when something feels inevitable, it ceases to be questioned. The second method was rare affirmation. After building deep attachment in prior phases, the man now offered emotional affirmations that were scarce but immensely powerful. A compliment delivered perfectly, a look that seemed to encapsulate everything, an unexpected act of care. He said, "The rarer the approval, the higher its worth. The higher its worth, the more it is pursued." Thus, the woman began to act naturally to deserve that affirmation, not from open manipulation, but because emotional conditioning was already entrenched. The third method was emotional pact. Here the man began sharing with the woman not just vulnerabilities, but missions, aims, and inner struggles. These weren't promises of a relationship, but emotional directions. He'd say things like, "There are certain things I'm attempting to change within myself," or, "I'm focusing on something larger now." The deeply involved woman began to feel part of this process. She saw herself as a sole person who truly understood this side of him, and when she believed she was part of his growth, the strongest emotional bond appeared, the bond of shared purpose. He wrote, "A woman is loyal not to the man, but to the man who represents what she aspires to become beside him." In other words, loyalty sprang from the sensation of building something together, even if that construction was more symbolic than real. The fourth method, perhaps the most disturbing, was controlled emotional dissonance. Simultaneously giving the woman moments of emotional depth, he introduced small tensions she couldn't resolve alone. A sudden silence, a distant gaze, a sentence seeming to carry hidden weight. These elements created micro-dissonances, tiny emotional cracks that made the woman want to heal him, to understand him profoundly, to reach him. Unknowingly, this placed her in the role of emotional guardian. In the collective reports, women repeated phrases like, "I felt he was hiding something, and I wanted to be the one to help him. I felt he needed me." This sense of being needed, though carefully planted, felt natural and transformed attraction into devotion. The fifth method was symbolic solidification. Here the man introduced shared symbols, memories, private phrases, small rituals, references only they understood. These symbols forge a shared emotional identity, and identities are harder to abandon than feelings. He said that when a woman links a symbol to a man, a song, a place, a habit, even an expression, she attaches not to man, but to what he represents emotionally. And symbols, unlike people, don't vanish. Finally, he described the ultimate technique, structured absence. This wasn't punitive absence or manipulative disappearance. It was a gentle, calculated emotional withdrawal that allowed everything planted to grow independently. For hours or days, the strategic suitor left space for the woman's mind to fill the void with memories, interpretations, fantasies, hopes, and projections. And the more she filled that void, the more he expanded within her. Machiavelli wrote the most famous line of this section. "It is not the man who conquers the woman. It is his absence that makes her heart complete him." When the man returned calmly with presence and controlled intensity, the woman received him not as a real person, but as the ideal version she herself had fashioned. The experiment concluded there. Machiavelli summarized, "Perfect and invisible captivation. When she realizes it, she is no longer being captivated. She is already bound." And so ended the manuscript that for centuries some called science, others called cruelty, and some called pure dark genius. If you found this exploration of psychology fascinating, be sure to like this video to help winds of thought grow. Your support fuels our deep dives into the human condition.